Well, part 2 is here at last. If you haven't watched part 1 already, you can click the link down below. Now back to our regular program. Before Nana can finish her story, the pair are brutally separated by a group of giant pig-like creatures called Fula and Wula. These are only some of Ezekiel's so-called children, and they are our first official boss fight of the game. Now, for the most part, the boss fights in this game aren't too terribly complicated to defeat. However, most bosses can only be damaged by certain weapons, with most of them being either vulnerable or immune to either the Arc, the Veil, or the Gale. The only real strategy here is to figure out which weapons they are weak against, but weirdly enough, that's rarely ever an issue. Early into your journey, Enoch will be gifted an item called the Eyes of Truth, which will display a halo over the enemy's head, indicating whether you have an advantage with the weapon you have on hand. The game is already pretty easy with minimal puzzle elements or multi-layer boss encounters, so for me it seems a bit redundant to have an item that just tells the player how you should approach said boss fight. After successfully dispatching Ezekiel's servants, we look to confront the fallen angel herself, only to find that she has fled further into the tower, with our next destination being Sariel's domain. Now, Sariel from the Book of Enoch was in charge of teaching humans the course of the moon, most likely in reference to the lunar calendar as a way of documenting the passage of time. Now, this chapter doesn't directly correlate to the knowledge he bestowed upon humanity, but ever since the dawn of time, the moon itself has been a figure surrounded in spiritual symbolism. One of the most commonly recurring themes the moon has ever represented since the early days of man is the embodiment of femininity, mostly in relation to various female deities, cycles, pregnancy, and childbirth. This, in my opinion, is directly related to what Sariel desires most in his fall from grace: love. Specifically the love of the flesh. Lusting after the beauty and passion shared between human couples, Sariel turned his back on God in pursuit of this love he felt towards both men and women. However, his understanding of love is selfish and distorted, with this world being a nursery for all his Nephilim children, even though we understand that these poor beings exist in complete and utter agony.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
Not only that, but this world is populated by the souls of Sariel's deceased lovers, doomed to forever roam this distorted realm, bound to the darkness for all eternity. Sadly, some of these women are still bewitched by Sariel's love and protect him and the Nephilim without understanding that he is the sole reason for them being trapped here in the first place. Towards the end of this chapter, we come face to face with Nick Cannon himself, with this being our first official boss fight against one of the Watchers. Leading up to this fight, Enoch has already been ambushed by Sariel in his human form, so he's not too terribly difficult to deal with. However, not long into the fight, Sariel, in a final act of desperation, discards his humanity, revealing himself as a giant bat-like creature with some bitch-ass moves that shoot out from the ground, and I don't know how to dodge them. This sucks and I don't like it. Thankfully, Uriel, one of the archangels that have been accompanying us up until now, decides to finally get his hands dirty and will assist Enoch with his overboost attack. Beating up enemies moving forward will fill up a power gauge that will cause Enoch's attacks to do more damage. Once full, you can also have Uriel activate Enoch's limit break ability, releasing a devastating attack combo that will usually expedite most enemies back to whatever afterlife they came from, so that's pretty cool. After Sariel says goodbye to the souls of his past lovers, we see the Nephilim begin to disappear as well. This implies that when the parent Watcher is defeated in battle, so too will their children perish alongside them. Now, before moving on to our next destination, Shin, the leader of the Freemen, speaks of a rampaging fire Nephilim that has been attacking his people and destroying everything in its path, and requests that we put it out of its misery. In doing so, he also mentions Ishtar once again, and this is something I wanted to touch on a bit before moving forward. Now, for context, in the real world, Ishtar, who also goes by the name Inanna, is a deity from Babylonian and Mesopotamian mythology, with her role being a goddess of love, war, fertility, and sex. She is known as the Queen of Heaven and is the personification of the morning star, and alongside her twin brother Shamash, the god of the sun, and her father Shin, I see what you did there, the god of the moon, they all come together to form the astral trinity. Now, at first, I thought this was a bit of a weird reference to make in a game that so far has been heavily influenced by Judeo-Christian mythology. But now, after looking more into her origins, she may have more to do with Abrahamic mythology than I initially anticipated. While doing research for this video, I found a book called The Tree of Souls, which comprises nearly 700 key Jewish myths drawing from sources like the Bible, the Talmud, and the Book of Enoch, just to name a few. I know, no need to thank me, I did this research all by myself. I'll just be taking my Pulitzer Prize now. Now, this legend is described as a Hebrew fairy tale, but in the story The Star Maiden, Ishtar was once a mortal woman living in the time before the Great Flood. It was this time before God destroyed the earth that the Watchers descended upon the world, taking human wives and sharing their heavenly secrets to humanity. Shemyaza, leader of the Watchers, whose name could also be translated as He Sees the Name, was believed to have known God's true name. Upon descending onto the earth, Shemyaza took a liking to Ishtar, promising that he would reveal to her the secrets of heaven if she would give herself to him. Ishtar, however, was much more cunning than Shemyaza had anticipated, and refuses his advances.
Man, you corny!
Now, this is where the story can go in two different directions. The first has Ishtar asking Shemyaza to tear off his wings and give them to her, so she can try them on. Shemyaza initially refuses, but then she starts pouting and teases him and probably does a funny little dance until he gives in. She then just flies away, and Shemyaza is left looking like a real asshole on the side of the road. The second way this can go is when Ishtar says that she will not give up the booty until Shemyaza tells her God's true name. Again, he refuses at first, but then she begins to mock him, insinuating that he doesn't actually know it and that he might not even be a real angel.
Pussy!
Which at that point, he finally gives in and tells her. As soon as Ishtar heard the holy name of God, she tried to pronounce it and was immediately beamed into heaven and was thus removed from sin, transforming into one of the brightest stars in the sky. The moral of the story, of course, is that you can always gaslight, gatekeep, girlboss your way into success. But at the end of the day, the fact that I was actually able to find a connection between Ishtar and the Book of Enoch is astounding, and it might have inspired her character in this game, but I'll touch more on that later. Arriving at Barakel's realm, you'll be greeted by a pair of Nephilim devouring one another.
I have an idea. Lugia'll eat me, so I'm stuck in Lugia's stomach alone.
This immediately transforms the creature into a fire Nephilim, destroying everything in its path and turning this world into an apocalyptic fiery hellscape. In the Book of Enoch, Barakel was in charge of teaching humans astrology. So for anyone who knows someone who blames all their bad decision making on them being born a Capricorn, you can blame this absolute Melvin. Now, when I was writing this script, it dawned on me that this world doesn't necessarily correlate to astrology. So I was concerned that my initial theory that their role in the game directly relating to their role in the original text might have been false. That was until I looked more closely at the manga, where it is revealed that Barakel was the one to create the veil that was used to hide the angels from God's sight. Something that stuck out to me was the idea that even before the angels arrived on Earth, humans were advancing in a way that God disapproved of. This leads Barakel to believe that God would flood the Earth to wipe the slate clean to start the creation process all over again. What's interesting to me is that this suggests that God is not an all-benevolent being, and that the Grigori might have had reason to defect from his side after watching God repeatedly create and destroy his own previous creations. So, in a desperate attempt to save the humans that he had been watching over, he created the veil in secret as a way to protect his favored humans from the potential wrath of God, in turn creating a false sky. This gives me reason to believe that Barakel was probably one of the only Watchers to have pure motives in his descent from heaven, and is easily one of my favorite characters in the story. Unfortunately, that is all we really get to know of him, because after defeating the fire Nephilim, who subsequently dissolves into a fountain of piss, a bigger Nephilim shows up and swallows Enoch whole. This is Barakel's Nephilim, and apparently at some point before we even entered this realm, this creature looking for anything to consume ended up devouring Barakel and absorbing his power. What a fucking Melvin.
Embarrassing!
Oh, I see. You still can't use your full power yet. I finally figured out why I'm here.
Okay, so as the title card says, this is Methuselah. In the Bible, Methuselah is known to be Enoch's firstborn child, but he's even more notorious as being the oldest man to have ever lived, clocking out at an estimated 969 years old. But this could also just be a mistranslation. What's interesting to note is that Methuselah's name can be translated a couple different ways. One of these readings can be translated as, "His death will send," or "When he is dead, it shall come," which sounds like an incomplete sentence unless you take into account that in the same year that he passed was the same year that God sent the flood. His name potentially being a prophecy of his death will send the flood, which is great and all, but what is he doing here? He's not even a twinkle in his father's balls yet. So what the fuck is going on?
Was that the power of God?
Okay, so for a while I had no idea what this was. I'm honestly still not quite sure what this is supposed to represent, given the fact that information is either scarce in supply or not translated into English. What I was able to find about this weapon was found in the Chronicles of Seta, which is a group of short stories translated and packaged with El Shaddai for its re-release on Steam. In Chapter 2, Seta is said to be one of the foundations of a world that God has since discarded, later being repurposed as a heavenly weapon that can be summoned by those who wield the true power, which I guess is just God ordering airstrikes for the sport of it.
Enemy spotted.
Does this matter to the story? No. Do either of these characters make an appearance later in the game? No. Does the game ever explain who these people are and what is happening? Of course not. Why would it? The next floor is Azazel's realm, and it's probably one of the more complex and intricate levels we have traveled to thus far. Some might say that it's very reminiscent to Disney's Tron franchise, but I would go so far as to say that it actually gives me more Angel Wars vibes. And if you know what Angel Wars is, congratulations, how's therapy?
I have an idea. Luke, you'll eat me.
No! God, please, no!
Now, Azazel in the Book of Enoch, even though he is considered the right-hand man of Shemyaza, it is arguable that he did the most damage to humanity and is considered the true villain in the text. Azazel taught humanity the art of warfare and weapon crafting. He also made known the metals of the earth and the art of working them, including the crafting of jewelry and the beautifying of the eyes. Now, while Shemyaza is noted in this chapter as being the leader of the Watchers, it is interesting that Azazel is mentioned first and given a much longer section and more brutal and aggressive subject to teach the humans. In the end, while Shemyaza and the rest of the Grigori are bound for 70 generations where they can watch their children destroy each other, Azazel is bound hand and foot to be thrown into the darkness, hidden within a desert to never see the light ever again, where all sin shall be ascribed to him. There is of course more to be said about Azazel being an antagonistic force in the Bible and in other Jewish texts, but if I were to keep going, we would be here all day. Now, as for Azazel in the manga and in game, his idea of love was to show the humans how to shape the land and to work with the materials that were available to them. He despised how God limited humanity from their full potential and saw it as his duty to reveal and accelerate man's technological capabilities under his supervision, leading mankind to evolve at an unnatural rate that God had never intended. Now, as for the level itself, it's just one giant motorcycle segment, which oddly enough was created with the assistance from the developers of the Tokyo Extreme Racer series of games, which definitely explains why it's probably one of the tightest designed sections throughout this game.
Sensational.
Not only that, but at the end of the level, you have to fight a boss that is so cool and badass that my computer promptly crashed. Regardless, Azazel is nowhere to be found on this floor either, so it is on to our next destination. Next, we come to Amaros's floor, which is a realm covered in water, including a squid-like water nephilim that appears to be swimming around peacefully. Now, in the manga, it is explained that Amoros was never part of the original group of Watchers, but was instead just a normal angel. However, in becoming friends with Enoch, he found love with the humans just based on Enoch's recollection from his time as a mortal man, insinuating that Enoch might have indirectly led to Amaros's fall. Now, unlike the other fallen angels, whose love for humanity was a means to their ulterior motives, Amaros's love is probably the most genuine, with him wanting to experience the emotions that humans possessed, versus the angels who couldn't, or at least shouldn't, feel anything. He didn't just want to live alongside the humans, he wanted to become human himself. Later in the level, we come across Amoros as he performs in front of a live audience from what appears to be the Final Fantasy X-2 stadium. So after that grand entrance, we get straight into brawling with our long-lost friend. What cracks me up about this fight is that instead of you battling Amoros one-on-one, you have to let him finish his dance routine, leaving you to beat up his backup dancers. Brody really said these hands are ready to eat for everyone. That shit stank, don't it? Ugh. My favorite part is when he just starts voguing to the camera, like, geez dude, come on, personal space. After Amoros has a quick costume change is when your genuine fight begins. Something interesting that is revealed during the match, however, is that Amoros somehow lost his voice during the fall from heaven, leaving him a mute who can only communicate through howling, I think?
On all levels except physical, I am a wolf.
This is expanded upon later in the game by Azazel, who states that the pain that the Watchers suffered upon their descent is beyond our imagination. Put a pin in that now, we'll come back to that in time. After you snatch the wig off Amoros, a voice calls out to Enoch as the darkness begins to encroach on the pair. As the player turns around, we see Nana being dragged into the darkness, prompting Enoch to chase after her. Even though this is an obvious trap, our silly sausage of a protagonist has already disappeared, leaving Amoros alone and absolutely shitting himself. Lucifer, however, always the opportunist, guilt trips Amoros into going after him. The Archangels lend the fallen angel their aid, leading Amoros to jump into the darkness in an attempt to rescue Nana and Enoch. Now, at the beginning of this section, you may have noticed that I never mentioned the role Amoros played in the Book of Enoch. That's mostly because it's a tad bit confusing on what his original role was. In the text, it states that he taught the humans the art of resolving enchantments, but as to what that means is a bit vague. Upon doing research as to what resolving enchantments explicitly means, I came up with about jack and shit, but the general consensus is that it's the art of undoing spells or counter magic. Now, except for the fact that this level reminds me of the worst deck in MTG, I don't find that Amoros' realm necessarily makes a connection between his role in the story versus his role in the game. However, Amoros is the only Grigori in this game to actually feel remorse for his part in the Watcher's rebellion. On top of that, he is the only Watcher to actually make amends for his sins, being redeemed in the eyes of Lucifer and the Archangels, and choosing to face the darkness to save his friend, absolving him of his defection and making him truly human. This leads us into the darkness, where we get to actually play as Amoros for this chapter. However, there are no heavenly weapons down here, so we're left with using our martial prowess to fight our way out. Overall, he's pretty fun to play with his moveset, having you punching and kicking your enemies, but with half the buttons being made useless without a weapon, Amoros will just show off his dance routine he's been working on.
Stop it.
Get some help.
Unfortunately, enjoying Amaros's gameplay is always going to be overshadowed by this godforsaken level. If you combine El Shaddai's eclectic art style, the random shifting camera angles, and the inability to figure out where the hell you're going to land, you'll get this abomination of a chapter. Now, I don't know what the name of this art style is, but when I was a kid, there was a show called Chowder where the characters would move, but the textures on their clothes would stay stationary. With this style of animation, combined with the bright, almost pastel blues and pinks, this section really began to strain my eyes, and I even had to take breaks while recording. In conclusion, I hate the darkness, all my homies hate the darkness, and you too should also hate the darkness. Moving on before I develop astigmatism, Amaros finds Nana lying unconscious, just kinda hanging out. Lucifer tells him he's got it covered and to keep looking for Enoch. Once Amaros leaves, the spirit of Ishtar appears, who has been trapped inside the darkness since her demise at the hands of the Nephilim. Ishtar then joins her soul to that of Nana's, and Lucifer takes it upon himself to watch after the girl till Amaros gets back. This is where we are introduced to the ruler of the darkness, Belial. This giant ball looking thing kinda looks like the final boss in Persona 4. Maybe, I don't know. In real life, Belial is usually understood to be the personification of a devil or sometimes even the devil, another name for Satan or Lucifer. His name can also be translated to worthless, which is a term used in the Old and New Testament to describe a class of people, aka the sons of Belial. In El Shaddai and the prophecies of Ishtar, it is hinted that Belial assisted the Grigori in exchange for the souls of everyone who died in the tower. However, in the Freeman's notes, it is also suggested that the Grigori were initially unaware that the humans they loved so much who perished would end up being consumed by the darkness. Now, I'm not positive in this statement, but I also believe that Belial is kinda like Seta, where Belial might be the remnants of a previous world that God had since destroyed, but instead of using its foundations as a weapon, he cast him aside, leading him to becoming the foundation of evil in this universe. If someone could get MatPat on the case, that would be wonderful. The evidence I'm working with are literal doodles on a used coffee napkin. Please send help. Amaros then finds Enoch, who has been consumed by the darkness, and is now Dark Enoch. Ooh. We of course beat some sense into him by telling him this is just a phase, leaving Enoch unconscious. Belial then tries to latch onto the pair with a stinky darkness, but not before Lucifer swoops in to save Enoch. However, Lucifer, being an absolute rat bastard, just sits back and watches as Amaros gets consumed by the darkness, leaving the Watcher alone and afraid. Like, Jesus Christ, that's really fucked up. Funnily enough, I thought that this would be the hint of Lucifer's true nature, and that he would end up being one of the villains in this story. I thought this theory was all but confirmed later in the next chapter when Lucifer is confused for being God himself.
You? Are you God? So I shall go to heaven.
Yeah. Uh-huh. I was mistaken for you again.
But nope, at least for the remainder of this game's duration, Lucifer is still on the side of God and is shown to be Enoch's ally. He's just a bit of a cock sometimes. Even though Enoch's body was recovered, his soul is still corrupted by the vileness, leading his body to be put on ice while his soul is sent back to heaven to be cleansed. While Enoch is going through the purification trials in heaven, time is still passing on earth, a whole 10 years to be exact. During this time, the forces of the Watchers, led by Ezekiel, have built themselves back up, leading them to attack the Freemen, killing their leader Shin. In the aftermath of the battle, Nana finds the body of her father, and in her state of terror, Ishtar is reawakened, leading Nana to transform into the warrior of old and completing the prophecy of her resurrection. Ishtar then takes up her father's role as the leader of what remains of the Freemen, pushing back Ezekiel's forces. Enoch is finally reawakened from his big sleepy, and continuing where he left off, makes his way to Arakiel's realm. Upon our arrival, both Lucifer and the Freemen both note that they cannot sense Arakiel's presence on this floor. Arakiel, in the Book of Enoch, is recorded as being the one to teach about the signs of the earth, suggesting that his expertise was in the art of geomancy. Whereas in the manga, he is presented as being arrogant and prideful, wishing to live contrary to God, as a figure to be revered, wanting to be worshipped from the summit of the tower that Barakiel asked him to create. The same tower as the one housing the Grigori now. That, however, is about all we get to know of him because he's dead. As we make our way up the tower, we stumble across Arakiel's grave, where it is told to us that he died during his fall from heaven. Bitch barely made it to Earth and they already got his ass in the ground. Aside from the fact that he's already one with the dirt, it makes sense seeing as his realm doesn't really have anything to do with geomancy or the earth element. The vibes really lean towards more futuristic minimalism, kind of like a lab or a testing facility in a sci-fi film. It honestly feels more like Azazel's realm part 2, which would make sense seeing it as extra storage space for the other fallen angels with some whack-ass platforming sections. Fuck, shit, goddammit, no, fucking, phew, alright, first try, I got it. As we make our way through the level, we find Ishtar fighting back against Ezekiel, slapping each other's titties. However, when we find Ishtar and her Nephilim companion, she was no match for the Grigori and has since been tainted by the darkness, leaving her unable to fight. Finally, we come face to face with Ezekiel, looking like she crawled out of bed in one of those purple morph suits. Luckily, she's not too much of a threat to us, and she goes down like a grandma falling down the stairs. Now that just leaves Shemyaza's realm left to conquer, but before leaving, we see a scene of Ishtar's Nephilim companion fading away. The implication here is that he was one of Ezekiel's children. On Shemyaza's floor, we finally confront Azazel for the final time, leading to the Watcher transforming into the Lord of Flies. He's not too terribly hard to deal with. He does, however, do this little kick move thing.
What?
But anyways, we raid his ass, but he's not satisfied with the idea of losing and tries to transform for a second phase. Key word here is tries. Belial, the being that originally bestowed the power to the fallen angels when they descended from heaven, is displeased with Azazel's failure to defeat Enoch, and sends a corrupted Amoros to finish the job proper. Now, thematically, this is probably the most upsetting fight thus far. Mostly because Amoros is one of the more sympathetic characters throughout this entire game, and the only reason he is now in his current state is directly correlated to Lucifer being absolute dick, leaving him to die and becoming an unwilling puppet to Belial. The fight itself is just another one-on-one brawl, but here Amoros is trapped inside the creature's chest, leading Enoch to try to break him out of his confinements. For a moment, it looks like Enoch might not be powerful enough to withstand the darkness. However, Ishtar arrives in the nick of time to lend Enoch her weapon to deliver the final blow. Dark Amoros is finally released from his prison, wishing Enoch a silent thank you before vanishing into shadow. Enoch then rushes to Ishtar's side, her body still corrupted by the darkness. How long have you been able to do that for? You could have done this hours ago. Enoch, what the fuck? The pair now make their way towards Shemyaza's life support system, ready to face the leader of the Grigori and the final Watcher left to apprehend. In the manga, it is very apparent that Shemyaza is the one to gather the Watchers in secret and tempt them with the idea of rebelling against God. His motivations being that he fell in love with a human woman who is never truly named but could be in reference to his connection to Ishtar in his original myth. Similarly, in the Book of Enoch, Shemyaza is the one to persuade his followers into falling, but in a more, oh woe is me sort of tactic, by saying, I fear ye will not indeed agree to this deed, and I alone shall have to pay for the penalty of a great sin. The other Watchers, also feeling lust towards the human women, try to reassure Shemyaza by suggesting that they will make a pact, stating that if they are caught and punished, that they will all bear the weight of the consequences together. After that, not much is said about Shemyaza as an antagonistic force, with Azazel being singled out as the greatest evil among the fallen, while the rest of the Watchers are banished to the desert for the remainder of time, including Shemyaza. The only other thing we really know about him is that he taught humans the art of enchantments and the science of root cutting, which could be interpreted as him teaching humans about the cultivation and manipulation of plants and trees, which was once considered forbidden knowledge. So, this is it, our final encounter. Our final boss. How does it go?
Release Semyaza.
That's right. Nothing. Zilch, not a speck of his soul to be seen. Looks like their descent went wrong. Right from the very beginning. Uh-huh. Hold on a second. Enoch! Aren't you forgetting you still have work to do here?
What? Okay, so with the fallen angels being either purified or dead, the tower begins to shut itself down, freeing the humans from their unnatural evolution, and the plans for the flood cleansing the earth has been rescinded. Roll credits. The last scene we see is a water Nephilim gliding its way through the water, blissfully unaware of the events that have just transpired, while also suggesting that Amros is potentially still alive. But dang, does that ending feel rushed. It's like a cold slap to the face. Like, yeah, it's kind of hilarious that out of the 7 angels that you were set out to collect, Enoch only ends up encountering 4 of them. We did, however, unlock some post-game bonus content, featuring a short story called Lucifer's Fall, where it is explicitly stated that due to budget constraints, El Shaddai's development was cut short, making it to where Semyaza never appeared in the final scene of the game. You can't make this shit up even if I wanted to. After finishing the game, I looked more closely at the publishers known as UTV Ignition Entertainment, or maybe better understood as formerly known. Whoops. In 2007, the same year of their acquisition, UTV announced the opening of 2 development studios, those being Ignition Florida and Ignition Tokyo. The Tokyo team, of course, being composed of former Clover Studio members in charge of El Shaddai, while the Florida team would begin working on a gritty, futuristic first-person shooter titled Reich. However, in 2010, months before the release of El Shaddai, the publisher was forced into a dramatic restructuring, with their London studio having to close their doors. That same year, sources at UTV confirmed the closing of the Florida-based studio as well, with some staff given opportunities to relocate to Houston or to hit the road. All of these announcements followed news of the Florida team burning through $23 million and numerous allegations of sexual and inappropriate conduct by one of the higher-ups in the company. I mean, as far as I know, no one got into the titty milk fridge, so it's safe to say it could have been a whole lot worse. All of this to say is that, surprisingly, the least commercial game ended up being the only one to survive UTV's development expansion. And despite promising first week sales in Japan, the game quickly ended up in bargain bins, with El Shaddai being hindered by its simplistic combat and its obviously unfinished story, leading Ignition Tokyo to close later that year. Now, normally this would be the end of the story, but in 2013, Takayasu announced his acquisition of the El Shaddai IP. This led him to working on the prequel manga for the game that I have included in this video, and with the help of his development company Chime, began work on a spiritual spin-off game titled The Lost Child, released back in 2017 and set in the El Shaddai universe. Over in Japan, El Shaddai has had a much greater impact, specifically for memes of Enoch's face for some reason, and even selling his own brand of jeans. Like dang, couldn't you have stood those bad boys up, starched those pants to hell and back? How are you gonna leave them on the floor like that? Like what? Now, back to the game. Is it worth playing? Yes. But it's got some glaring flaws, and some people won't be able to overlook them, and honestly, I don't blame them. I think this game is bizarre, thought-provoking, tedious, beautiful to look at, unfinished, and probably one of my favorite games of all time. I don't know what it is about this game that attracts me to it. I thought it had something to do with its connection to religious mythology that scratched a particular itch that I needed tending to, but looking at the game as a whole, I just see all the potential El Shaddai could have been. This game feels like it has so many ideas, but it didn't have the scale, the time, or the budget to fulfill its ultimate goals. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Nowadays, with games being as expensive as they are to make, publishers aren't willing to make games with the understanding that they could potentially fail, choosing safe or low-effort games that don't push the envelope with the purpose of innovation. If anything, it feels like indie games have kind of taken the reins for innovation and trying something new, or maybe even re-examining and reinventing older games and genres which have since been ignored by the general public. So for me, there's something so refreshing about a game that tries to do something out of the box, tries to envision a world on a larger scale, and tries to fly closer to the sun. Like I said at the beginning, El Shaddai was re-released on Steam with an HD remaster back in 2021, this being the only reason I found this game. Not only that, El Shaddai has also been ported to the Nintendo Switch back in April of this year, so maybe El Shaddai is gearing up for a return? Who knows, it could be in the form of a sequel, or maybe we'll get the Nier replicant treatment with a fresh and complete remake with the creator's intended ending. My guess is that they're testing the waters to see consumer interest for more content in this franchise, but however it goes, I will be there to see what happens next. Thank you so much for your patience. I really hope you guys like this video and also the change in format. I don't plan on doing this for every video moving forward, but as my script got longer, it made sense for me to break it up into something a bit more digestible. It definitely helped me when editing for it to not take my entire eternity to release, but it also gave y'all more content to munch on, so I hope it translated well. And again, please subscribe and leave a like if you like what I'm doing, and leave a comment down below on what you would like to see me tackle next. Here's to the new year. I'll see you all in 2027. Kisses!